to have people come into our office and they're like, hey, they didn't read me my rights. What does this mean? Nobody said I have the right to remain silent. We just had, we'll call him John that just came in, right? So he gets handcuffed at a traffic stop, right? He's got suspicion of drug possession. Not exactly the crime of the century here, right? And he's never read his rights. And his mom and his family, they're all calling saying, look, you got to get him out of jail immediately. They never read him his rights. Does that mean the whole case is dismissed? And because of how it's portrayed in the movies and film and the media, people don't really understand what that means. What that means when you're read your rights, what Miranda rights are. Some people have heard that term. And it's important to know what these things mean. I think every citizen should know what this stuff means, just so if you ever have an encounter with the police or there are some sort of accusations made, you know what you're talking about and you can protect yourself. Hi folks, my name is Keith Stickley and I'm a criminal defense attorney here at the Stickley Law Firm in downtown Hillsdale, Michigan. Every week I try to make legal content to inform people who probably have found themselves on the wrong side of the law and have never had any negative contact with law enforcement before, and try to inform them of their rights, how the legal system works, and what they might be up against if they or somebody that they care about has been charged with a crime here in Michigan. And if you come across this video, you or somebody you care about probably is in some trouble, and you're probably up late at night looking for answers to what might happen. And so I've started to create this series of videos so that when you're searching after hours or on the weekends, when you can't get a direct answer from an attorney, you might get a little bit better insight on what your legal problem entails, what are the possible ramifications, and what are potentially some solutions, what you might be able to do about it to help protect your rights. And I do my best to try to break things down into sort of easy to understand real world language for the everyday person to understand what's going on. It's important to remember that this is not a substitute for formal legal advice. We don't have an attorney-client privilege just because you're on my YouTube channel or watching my content. But if you or somebody that is in legal trouble in some of the areas that we serve, you're more than welcome to reach out to my office. We'll bring you in, we'll have an in-depth conversation and see if it's something that we can help you out with. Today, let's jump into the topic of what happens if nobody reads your rights and what are Miranda rights, because this is one of the most misunderstood things that people who have contact with the criminal justice system have to deal with and have questions about. Unless you're living under a rock or on some deserted island, I'm sure you've seen a movie or a television show or an issue of Cops where somebody has contact with police and the police oftentimes whip out a card, or they just say it from memory, something to the tune of, you're under arrest, you have the right to remain silent, anything you can do and say can be used against you in a court of law. And it almost goes hand in hand with the arrest, so much so, it's even in our pop culture that people think that if they are under arrest and that magical language does not get said, that means that there's no case against them. The case has to get dismissed. Now, the reading of these rights in legal speak are referred to as Miranda rights. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. The reason they're called Miranda rights is because of a famous court case, People v. Miranda, that established the legal framework of when people need to be read their rights. And if they're not read their rights, what can happen in terms of a criminal case. As we go through all these points, it's important to remember that Miranda rights are very powerful, but they don't necessarily mean what most people think. So we're going to tell you exactly when Miranda matters, how it can protect you, and why not getting read your rights might not save your case. But it still could change your case dramatically, and that's where you really need to work with an attorney who knows what's going on. So let's jump into a brief history of what Miranda rights are, where it comes from, okay? And it all goes back to early in 1963. A gentleman by the name of Ernesto Miranda was arrested in Phoenix, Arizona. And I won't go into all the details of the case, but bottom line, the police took him into custody and then they interrogated him without a lawyer. And he confessed to the crime that he was being accused of. And throughout the case in the lower courts, he maintained that the confession was sort of forced, and he didn't know that he did not have a right against self-incrimination. He didn't have the right he didn't know that he didn't have the right not to talk to the police and admit to crimes, because you don't have to admit your crimes. Everybody has the Fifth Amendment right. You can assert your Fifth Amendment, which is the right to stay silent, to not incriminate yourself in a crime. And so finally in 1966, the case reaches the Supreme Court in a case, Miranda v. Arizona. And the result of that case basically was that police officers must inform suspects that are in a custodial interrogation of their rights, of their right to remain silent. So the actual rules as laid out in the case where you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can be used against you. You have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford an attorney, one could be provided for you, usually at taxpayer expense. So what isn't a custodial interrogation? We got to talk about that before we jump into the next step because it's important to define these terms. If somebody is in police custody, in other words, they're having a custodial situation, that means the police have them in an area and they are not free to leave. Okay, they are in the custody of a police officer. They are not free to leave. If somebody can walk away when a police officer is asking them questions, then they're not in custody. And this is something that's hotly contested often. I've had jury trials about this very issue of whether or not somebody was resisting arrest or whether they were not in custody or whether they were free to go. And Miranda specifically applies to situations where there is a custodial interrogation. In other words, the police have stopped somebody and they are not free to go. They're in handcuffs. They can't run away. That's where Miranda takes place. Miranda does not apply to situations where a police officer is just randomly asking you a question on the side of the street, like, hey, where you going? What you doing? And that's also why it's just the rule of thumb is that unless you are talking to them for some immediate emergency reason, don't talk to police if it sounds like they're asking about a crime where you're somehow remotely involved. Don't talk to them. The police are, believe it or not, when it comes to criminal investigations, not there to help you, especially if you haven't been the victim of a crime. So don't talk to police. But what if you want to talk to the police? I'll say it one more time for the people in the back. Don't talk to the police. So a couple of common misconceptions about Miranda. Number one, if they didn't read me my rights, my case gets dismissed. That's a myth. That's not true. Miranda only matters if you were both in custody, couldn't leave, and interrogated, meaning the police were asking you questions. If you were told that you were under arrest, and you were not read your rights, but the police didn't ask you any questions, no Miranda warning is needed. How would that work out? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say a police officer had probable cause to think that you had somehow committed some crime. Maybe they saw something, and they run up on you, and they say, hey, police, stop. You are under arrest. They slap the handcuffs on you, and they throw you in the back of the car. They don't really say much, and they drive you to the jail. They haven't asked you any questions. They haven't asked you what happened. They haven't got your side of the story, anything, right? And they never read you your rights. Is that a valid arrest? Yes, it actually is. If you are not interrogated by the police, no Miranda warning is needed. It doesn't make the arrest not valid or not legal. Also, point number 3, I think that's the point that we're on. If you have other physical evidence on your person, in other words, the police officer had probable cause to arrest you because they think they witnessed something and they put you under arrest. They say, stop, you're under arrest. You get the handcuffs and everything on you. If you have evidence found physically on your person that are found in a search after the arrest, like drugs or a gun or some sort of other weird contraband. In Michigan, we find all the time brass knuckles, weird stuff, right? Miranda doesn't suppress any of that. If they don't read you your rights, those things can still be used in your criminal case against you without you saying anything, even if you were never told your Miranda rights. Let's talk about when Miranda actually matters. When do having your rights read to you actually matter? And I'm going to try to give you an example to best illustrate what it is I'm talking about. The police thought that they saw you doing something wrong, they yell you're under arrest, they handcuff you, okay, and they do not read you your Miranda rights. So you're in custody, right? You're in the custody of the police. They say, hey, where'd you get those drugs at? Are these drugs yours? Or tell me what happened. At that point, if you answer those questions and they have not read you your rights, those statements, only those specific statements and anything that comes after it, might not be able to be used against you. A good defense attorney will probably get those statements suppressed or thrown out or not being able to be given to the judge or jury. And that's the real power of Miranda. That's what Miranda is about. It's really about self-incrimination. But even if they violate Miranda, that doesn't mean that the arrest is not good. If the police have probable cause to arrest you because they potentially witnessed something or they have some other probable cause, then the arrest might still be perfectly valid. And it does happen very many times where there's some sort of a Miranda deficiency. In other words, police ask questions without reading Miranda. but they have other evidence. They have other physical evidence. So they don't need your statements to use against you. And so the case still goes forward. And while your statement might not be allowed in front of a judge or jury, all the other evidence probably will be. In other words, if you get arrested and you're making all these statements and the cops don't read your Miranda rights, but during the search, you got 6 guns, a couple of speedballs, 12 grams of cocaine. Why didn't you share? Whatever, brass knuckles in your back pocket. All that physical evidence that's on you, it's probably all going to be allowed in as evidence. And that's not going to make your lawyer's job easy. So what do we do when we run across these situations? What do we do instead? Number one rule of thumb is don't talk to the police. That's number one. Number two, just say as little as possible. And always ask for an attorney. You can be polite. You have to be polite. You should be polite because these guys just want to go home at the end of the day too. You say, officer, I understand that you might have some questions, but respectfully, I request an attorney be present before I answer any questions. And you can say it 30 million times. Get used to it. The other phrase that you need to get into your vocabulary in the event that a police officer ever comes up and starts asking you questions that make you feel uncomfortable is, officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If you are being detained, then stop talking. Do not make any statements, right? Because it might be used against you if they Mirandize you, okay? If you're free to leave the situation. Respectfully, safely, leave the situation. Believe it or not, when every Tom, Dick, and Harry cop comes up to you and asks you questions, you don't have to talk to them. You don't have to talk to them. I highly recommend that you be polite. They do have guns, and they are just trying to do their job, hopefully, but you're under no requirement whatsoever to answer a police officer's question. So if you're detained, you say, I want a lawyer. I am invoking my right to remain silent. Let's go over that again. I want a lawyer. I am invoking my right to remain silent. That's what you do. That's it. You be polite, and if you got to say that 90 million times, you say it 90 million times. There are many times where they say, well, come on, I'm just trying to help you. This could go a lot easier if you just make some statements and tell me who the real bad guy is. Look, if these guys are going to press charges against you and arrest you, they're going to press charges against you and arrest you anyway. No amount of talking at the side of the road while a cop has got you detained is going to get you out of any trouble. I guarantee it. So all this being said, how can an intelligent attorney use Miranda to fight your case? Well, quite frankly, if there were statements made that are incriminating or maybe put certain pieces of the puzzle together that make the case look bad against you or whoever you care about, then a competent attorney will file motions to suppress those statements, to keep them out of the case. When police violate your rights, that weakens the case. That makes the prosecutor's job way harder because you have to remember, if you go to a jury trial where either 6, depending if you're in a misdemeanor situation, or 12 if you're in a felony situation, jurors are deciding your fate, they are taking credibility into account. And believe it or not, just because they wear a badge and a gun does not automatically make them credible witnesses. Many times we're able to make law enforcement not look credible because they're not credible. If your attorney is able to weaken the case by making them look not credible, that can greatly help in your defense. The last section here about how a competent attorney would use Miranda to fight your case is oftentimes if it's evident that a competent attorney is going to get a bunch of statements suppressed due to Miranda violations. Just from personal experience, that is when you get some crazy lenient plea negotiations and sometimes even outright dismissals of cases because they know that makes the people's job of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed a crime so much more difficult. So in wrapping up, it's important to remember, do not rely on TV shows, okay? Your Miranda rights are real, okay? But they're limited. And they have to be properly applied to the situation that you or whoever you care about finds themselves in. Just because they were arrested and not read their rights does not mean that the case is going away and that the arrest was not proper. What really matters is how and when Miranda rights and suppression is used in your case. If you or somebody you care about was arrested and believes their Miranda rights were violated, it's imperative to immediately get competent legal counsel. And if you're in an area where we practice, give us a call. We'd be more than happy to bring you into our office, do a thorough case evaluation, and see what your options are. And I guarantee you, if there's a Miranda issue, we will fight it extremely aggressively. If you like this content and found it helpful, do me a big favor, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it around with your friends or other people who might benefit from this information. Thanks a lot, stay safe, and we'll see you real soon.